Welcome to this revision topic video looking at the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, a fundamental part of the AQA A-level macroeconomics course. We'll overview the model very quickly. Aggregate demand is the total planned demand for goods and services in the economy. It's made up of consumption, which equates to about 60% of aggregate demand in the UK, investment, government spending, and net exports, which are actually negative because the UK runs current account deficit. It's a downward sloping curve because at a higher price level, that means people have less real income and therefore will spend less. Shifts in aggregate demand might be caused by a number of things that we'll look at shortly, like interest rates, exchange rates, confidence, and government policy. Aggregate supply is the total planned supply of goods and services in the economy. We break it into the short run, the near future, which is upward sloping because to produce more output costs more, meaning higher national income means a higher price level. Whereas the long run is the long term. And in the long term, we assume that all factors of production are used. So we're always at our kind of capacity. So we get this vertical curve fixed at that level. Shifts in short run aggregate supply curve are caused by changes in costs, while shifts in the long run aggregate supply curve are caused by anything that changes our ability to produce, our quality or quantity of factors of production. Our short run equilibrium occurs when aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply are in balance, while long run equilibrium occurs when long aggregate demand and our long run aggregate supply curve are in balance. Aggregate demand, let's zoom in a bit more detail, is our total planned demand. Consumption is spending by households or consumers on goods and services, and that's going to be determined by things like interest rates. High interest rates mean borrowing is more expensive, saving is more attractive. So high interest rates would mean less consumption. Wealth, the stock of savings, not necessarily in the form of just money, held by consumers. More wealth is going to be more spending as consumers have higher lifetime worth. Disposable income will affect consumption. That's income after taxes, like income taxes, and transfer payments, like welfare payments. And a high confidence level with consumers will lead to more spending, as will a greater access to credit, to loans from banks. A key idea with consumption is the marginal propensity to consume. That is the amount of an increase in my income that I would spend. So if I got £100 extra, if I spent £60 of it, my MPC would be 0.6. That helps us define a concept called the multiplier. The multiplier is the idea that an injection into the economy from exports or government spending or investment will have a multiplied effect. Because when one person receives income, they will consume some of it, which becomes somebody else's income, and so on and so forth. The multiplier is calculated by 1 over 1 minus the MPC. So the bigger the MPC, the bigger the multiplier. And we can also work it out as the ratio of initial injections to the overall increase that will have in national income. Investment is firms buying capital, that's man-made resources used in production. We're interested in net investment, which is investment that actually increases the economy's capital stock. That's made up of gross investment, total investment, minus investment that is just going on depreciation. That's the decrease in value of the economy's capital stock as capital wears out. This will be, again, determined by interest rates because high interest rates mean borrowing is more expensive. It'll be determined by profits. If firms are very profitable, they're more able to fund investment. High confidence means high investment. And things like government regulation will affect investment as well because government regulation can make it quite costly to invest if firms have to jump through different loopholes in order to do that. Investment leads us to a similar concept, the multiplier, but crucially it's quite different. The accelerator theory is the idea that when there's an increase in the growth rate of national income, we get much more investment. And that's because firms invest in order to meet future demand. If there's an increase in growth rates, suddenly the demand that we're expecting in a year or 2 years is going to be much greater. So firms will massively increase their investment more than the increase in growth. And that amplifies the effect of changes. Combining the accelerator and multiplier means that when we get an initial injection, we can actually have quite a substantial increase in national income, bigger than that initial injection. As for government spending and net exports, our other two components, we're going to cover them in topic 6 for government spending and topic 8 and 9 for the determinants of net exports. Aggregate supply we break into short run and long run. In the short run, our factors of production are immobile. That means there's unused factors of production, so we can produce more, but it's going to be more and more costly to do so. The big thing that affects short run aggregate supply are costs of production. So higher costs of production mean less short run aggregate supply. Things like wages, raw material prices, subsidies, those are payments from the government that would reduce costs. All taxes, either indirect or corporate taxes that affect profitability, are going to affect short run aggregate supply, as are regulations from the government. In the long run, however, all of our resources are fully mobile. They're all fully used. So we're at that fixed level. And the things that affect that productive capacity, that fixed long-run level of national income, are going to be things that improve our ability to produce, the quality and quantity of our facts of production. More quantity would mean things like more workers, perhaps through migration, or more capital through investment. Whereas quality, we're thinking better workers, perhaps from increased education, or better capital from more innovation, or more productivity as we become better at combining the two. Shifts in long-run supply will also mean shifts in short-run aggregate supply. Of course, the same is not true in reverse. Short-run equilibrium is going to occur when aggregate demand and short-run aggregate supply are in balance. And that's going to be affected primarily by economic shocks, unforeseen changes in aggregate demand or aggregate supply, things like a recession abroad, or sudden government changes in policy, or the COVID pandemic, or a general election. Those will move one of our curves and therefore change equilibrium price level and national income. If we end up with an output level in the short-run equilibrium which is less than our long-run potential, we have a negative output gap. Our economy is not producing as much as it could be. We have unused resources, which is going to lead to unemployment. Whereas in the long run, if output is more than the long-run potential, we have a positive output gap. We're beyond our productive capacity. We're producing unsustainably. It's not sustainable. In the long run, we're going to end up back where we were. We'll see why in a moment. We need to be able to link these changes in short-run equilibrium to our macroeconomic objectives. So if there's more aggregate demand or more short-run aggregate supply, we're going to get more national income. That will lead to more economic growth, more short-run growth. Less unemployment, because more national income means more demand for goods and services. Firm labour is in derived demand with output, so more output means more demand for labour, less unemployment. And we're going to get more spending on imports, because as national income goes up, firm companies, consumers spend more on everything, including more on imports. If there's a more aggregate demand or less short-run aggregate supply, leading to an increase in the price level, we're obviously going to get inflation. And we're going to get an impact on trade, because a higher price level reduces exports, because UK exports are more expensive relative to other countries. We do need to understand our long-run equilibrium, and particularly how we reach that long-run equilibrium. Classical economists argue that the economy automatically returns to that long-run trend. So if there's a negative output gap and our short-run equilibrium is below our long-run aggregate supply curve, that means we have unutilized resources. We've got unemployed workers and capital. Excess supply of workers and capital is going to push down the cost of those things. We're going to get a reduction in wages. Reduced costs mean more short-run aggregate supply, which is going to bring us back to our full employment level in the long run. If we had conversely a positive output gap, there's excess demand for labour, pushing up wages, decreasing short-run aggregate supply, bring us back to full employment. Now, Keynesian economists argue something different. While classical economists say that the economy will adjust automatically, Keynesian economists argue that unemployment may persist in the long run because that mechanism we just saw won't happen. Wages don't fall. That might be because of wage contracts. Wages are only determined annually, so we can't just change wages. It might be because of market perfections like minimum wages or trade unions, or it might be because of the efficiency wage hypothesis, the idea that firms want to keep wages high to attract workers and minimise labour turnover. The Keynesian aggregate supply curve therefore combines the long run and the short run, because we can be at any point in it at any length of time. The first stage is very elastic because we're below productive capacity. There's lots of spare resources, so we can increase our output without increasing our price level. Secondly, though, as we approach our productive capacity, resources are increasingly scarce. If I want to hire more workers, I've got to attract them by raising the wage. And eventually we hit our productive capacity. All our resources are used, and therefore any increase in aggregate demand will be inflationary. Now, this curve is neither long run or short run. It's both, because we can be stuck at any point on it in the long run and short run. And other than the argument between classical economics and Keynesian economics, this curve is also really useful because it shows us why it is that an increase in aggregate demand becomes progressively more inflationary the closer I am to full employment. Compare AD1 to AD2 versus AD3 to AD4. You can see how the price level differs as we move along the curve.